My name is Joanna Hayes. I'm 24 years old. And this is the story of how my own family kicked me out on Christmas Eve, and how I rose from nothing, cut them off completely, and watched their lives unravel while I built something better. It started on the coldest Christmas Eve I can remember. I had just come back from a long shift at the insurance office, the hem of my jeans still damp from the slush outside, my coat clinging to the last wisps of coffee and printer toner. Home was supposed to be a place of warmth. A place where family was thicker than the bitter winds outside. I thought maybe this year, despite the tired faces and the empty conversations, we could at least pretend to be a family again. The house looked no different than it did any other winter. A sad, half-dead tree sagged in the corner of the living room, its ancient string lights flickering like a dying heartbeat. My mom, Diane, placed a dry-looking ham on the dinner table. My dad, Harold, already had a glass of cheap wine in his hand, swirling it slowly while staring blankly at the dusty chandelier above us. My little brother, Tyler, only 17, gave me a small, tired smile as I shrugged off my coat and sat down. For a few minutes, there was only the clink of utensils, the faint crackle of a forgotten radio station playing some old carol. I filled my plate in silence, scooping up mashed potatoes, trying to avoid the thick tension in the air. Tyler kept glancing at me like he knew something I didn't. And then Dad slammed his knife down on the table. The noise cracked the silence like a gunshot. I jumped, my fork slipping from my fingers and clattering against the plate. "Joanna," he said, his voice low but filled with a sharp, cutting edge. "You're a burden. You can't live here anymore." For a second I just stared at him, sure I must have heard wrong. The words didn't make sense in my mind. Burden. Leave. I looked at Mom for some kind of explanation, but she just laughed nervously, her eyes darting from Dad to the half-empty wine bottle on the table. She didn't deny it. She didn't even defend me. I turned back to Dad. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," he said, sipping his wine with a sneer curling at the corner of his mouth. "You're an adult. You've stayed long enough. It's time you leave." I couldn't believe it. I didn't stay because I needed a roof. I had a steady income. I stayed because they needed me. When Dad lost his job and Mom's paycheck could barely cover groceries, it was my paycheck that kept the lights on. My bank account that paid for the heating bill through the brutal winters. My overtime hours that made sure Tyler had internet for school. And now, sitting at this sad little table on Christmas Eve, they were acting like I was a parasite. Mom opened her mouth like she might say something, but Dad cut her off with a sharp glare. "I've made my decision," he said. Tyler's voice cracked as he whispered, "If they can kick you out this easily, who's next?" I looked across the table at him, the only person in that house who still mattered to me. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to scream. I just sat there, staring into the hollow shell of what used to be my family, and I made a choice. "All right," I said softly, pushing my chair back. Dad smirked like he had just won some invisible war. Mom looked away. Tyler watched me with heartbreak written all over his face. I scraped my half-eaten food into the sink, feeling the cheap ceramic plate scrape against my fingers. I turned, gave Tyler a small, reassuring nod, and walked upstairs without a word. In the quiet of my room I packed. Folded each hoodie, each pair of jeans, each little scrap of a life I had built while everyone else in that house coasted on my sacrifices. My fingers moved on autopilot. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the dampness on my sleeves. There was a soft knock at my door. "Joanna," Tyler whispered. "Open the door." He looked so small standing there. His shoulders hunched like he was carrying a weight he couldn't set down. "Are you really leaving?" He nodded. "But, who's going to pay the bills?" he asked, voice shaking. "The heat, the water." I swallowed hard. "They'll have to figure it out." "But they can't," he whispered. "You know they can't." "I know," I said. "But I can't keep being their safety net forever. I deserve a life too." He bit his lip hard enough to turn it white. "I want to go with you." "You can't," I said gently. "You're still a minor. And you need to finish school." Tears welled up in his eyes, but he blinked them away. "You'll still text me every day. Every single day," I promised. When he left the room, I pulled out my laptop, logged into all the utility accounts, and unlinked my credit cards. Electricity, water, internet, cell phone plan, all gone. They kicked me out. Let them see what it feels like when I leave for real. The house felt colder by the minute. Not from the December winds creeping through the thin windows, but from the heavy silence settling over everything I had once called home. I zipped up my suitcase, glanced one last time around the room that had been my only refuge, and wheeled it toward the stairs. The only sound was the creak of the old wooden steps as I descended. No one came to stop me. No apologies. No half-hearted pleas to stay. I could hear the TV blaring some old Christmas special from the living room, and for a brief, bitter moment, I wondered how they could sit there pretending nothing had happened. I tightened my coat around me, hoisted my suitcase into the trunk of my car, and climbed into the driver's seat. My fingers trembled as they gripped the wheel, but my heart was steady. For the first time in my life, I was making a choice for myself. I drove through the empty streets, the dark houses blinking with lazy Christmas lights, until I reached Marissa's apartment. She opened the door before I even knocked, pulling me into a tight, wordless hug. I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I just stood there, feeling the last of the ice around my heart finally begin to crack. "Stay as long as you need," she said. That night, as I lay on her worn-out couch under a pile of borrowed blankets, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, feeling hollow but free. Every fiber of my being screamed that I had done the right thing. Still, the pit in my stomach reminded me that my absence would have consequences. For them, not for me. The next morning I logged back into the utility portals one last time. I checked each account carefully. Electricity, unpaid. Water, suspended. Internet, disconnected. I even cancelled the Amazon Prime account my mother used religiously to binge soap operas. I leaned back in the chair and exhaled. Not a breath of triumph. Just pure, exhausted relief. 4 years of carrying their weight on my back, erased with a few clicks. And then the silence shattered. My phone buzzed violently on the table. 5 missed calls. Again. Dad again. Taylor. Cold chill ran down my spine. Tyler's text was short and sharp. "Power's out." Dad screaming. "Stay away." I pressed the phone to my chest, closing my eyes. I knew it would come to this. I knew cutting them off wouldn't just inconvenience them. It would tear their carefully balanced world apart. Still, when the 6th call came through, something inside me made me answer. "Joanna." Mom's voice was frantic, high-pitched. "The lights are out. The TV's dead. The Wi-Fi's down. What happened?" I could hear Dad bellowing in the background, cursing at the microwave that refused to work, at the heater clicking uselessly in the vents. I spoke calmly, each word deliberate. "I stopped paying for it." Dead silence. "You can't." Gasp. You have to. It's your duty." "My duty," I repeated, a dark laugh bubbling up. "You kicked me out. Remember. I don't owe you anything anymore." "But we're family," she cried. I stared at the wall, at the tiny cracks spiderwebbing through the cheap apartment paint. Family doesn't treat each other like that. And then, for the first time in years, I hung up on my mother. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply pulled Marissa's second blanket tighter around me and stared out the window into the black December night. I knew they would come after me next. I knew Dad, in particular, wouldn't accept losing control. But I also knew something else. I wasn't afraid anymore. The next day at work, while filing insurance claims, my phone buzzed again. Bank alert, suspicious login attempt. Froze. Opened the app with shaking hands. 3 failed password entries. 1 reset request. My blood ran cold. It didn't take a genius to figure it out. Called Tyler immediately. "Is Dad home?" Tyler's voice was tight, whispered. "Yeah. He's on Mom's laptop. Keeps cursing at the screen." "Is he using old notebooks? Passwords?" "I think so," Tyler said. He's going through everything. My jaw clenched. Thanks, Ty. Stay out of his way. Lock your door if you have to. I spent the next 2 hours changing every password to every account I owned. Bank, credit cards, streaming services, even the stupid pizza delivery app. Every security question, every recovery email, every two-factor authentication setting, changed. It felt like building a fortress brick by painful brick. And just in time. That night, another bank alert popped up. Tempted breach. Block. I stared at it with a bitter smile. Dad was trying. He was trying hard. But this time he was going to lose. For 3 days I didn't hear anything. No calls. No text. Just blissful icy silence. I started to believe maybe it was over. Until Tyler texted me during my lunch break. Microwaves dead. No lights. Dad punched the fuse box. Mom's freaking out. Put my sandwich down. My appetite gone. They were crumbling without me. And not slowly either. That night, as Marissa and I made a sad little dinner of boxed pasta, my phone rang again. I almost didn't pick up. But something in me wanted to hear it. Joanna, Mom sobbed on the line. The house is dark, cold. Your father's losing his mind. We don't know what to do. I stirred the pasta absently, watching it swirl in the pot like tiny drowning bodies. I'm not coming back, I said. You can't do this, she wailed. You're heartless. I laughed softly. Not cruelly. Just tired. I'm not heartless. I'm just tired of bleeding for people who don't even notice. Hung up. And for the first time in my life I felt weightless. The next morning I woke to find another alert on my phone. Suspicious activity detected. Multiple failed password attempts. I barely needed to guess who was behind it. I called Tyler as soon as I could. His voice was low, almost defeated. Joanna, he's getting worse. I pressed the phone closer to my ear. Worse how? He's tearing apart the living room looking for anything he can use. Old bills, receipts, notebooks. Anything that might have your info. I clenched my jaw so tightly it hurt. Stay away from him, Tyler. Mean it. Don't even be in the same room. I know, he whispered. But, Joanna, he's not just mad anymore. He's obsessed. That word sent a chill down my spine. Obsessed. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something darker, more dangerous. I spent the rest of the day half distracted at work, jumping every time my phone buzzed. I knew I had done the right thing. I knew standing up for myself was the only way out. But knowing that didn't make the reality any easier. That evening, just as I was putting on my coat to leave the office, my phone buzzed again. It was Marissa. Joanna, she said in a panicked whisper. Someone's banging on the apartment door. My heart plummeted into my stomach. Stay inside, I said immediately. Lock the door. I'm coming. I raced to my car, adrenaline pounding so hard in my ears I could barely hear myself think. When I turned onto her street, I saw him. My father. Standing outside Marissa's building, fists pounding on the front door. His face red and twisted in fury. I parked half a block away and called the police. When they arrived, it was almost surreal. Watching from the shadows as 2 officers restrained him, listening to his slurred shouts about how he was her father, how he had rights, how I owed him everything. I stayed hidden, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I didn't want to see him anymore. I didn't want to hear another word. Eventually, they hauled him into the back of a cruiser. Not arrested, but given a very clear warning. I thought maybe that would scare him off. I was wrong. The next morning, a text from an unknown number popped up on my phone. You think you can run. You think this is over. Family is forever. No name. No signature. But I knew exactly who it was. I screenshotted it immediately and sent it to the police department along with a copy of my earlier report. I wasn't playing nice anymore. I wasn't going to wait for things to escalate further. And yet, a sick feeling settled deep in my gut. The feeling that this wasn't over. Not even close. Later that evening, Tyler called. Joanna. His voice cracked. What's wrong? He took a shaky breath. Mom stole your car. blinked. What? I saw it, he said quickly. It's parked outside our house. She's been using it to get groceries, go to work, everything. She even left a coffee cup inside with her name on it. I felt the world tilt slightly around me. I had the spare keys. I had the title. The car was still registered under my name. And she had just taken it. Without a word. Without asking. Without even pretending to have permission. The betrayal hit harder than anything else so far. Somehow I had expected it from Dad. But Mom. The woman who used to braid my hair and tuck me into bed at night. I drove to the old house immediately. Heart pounding the entire way. There it was. My car. Parked brazenly out front. Dust on the hood. But coffee cups and grocery bags cluttering the seats. I knocked on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Mom opened it, her expression tight, almost defiant. "Joanna," she said coolly, as if we were two neighbors meeting over a fence. "You stole my car," I said flatly. She crossed her arms. "It wasn't being used. We needed it." "You don't get to decide that," I said, voice low and dangerous. "You don't get to take what isn't yours." "It's family," she said, like that was some kind of magic spell that erased theft. Pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police." Her face crumbled. "You wouldn't. You already made that choice for me," I said. "You sold my laptop too, didn't you?" She said nothing. Silence was confirmation enough. When the officers arrived, I stayed calm, presenting the paperwork for the car, the receipts, even photos of the original ownership documents. Mom tried to argue, but her voice cracked under the weight of her own lies. They made her hand over the car keys. Warned her about potential charges if she ever tried it again. As I drove away from that broken little house, I realized something important. I wasn't just escaping anymore. I was winning. The engine hummed beneath me as I steered the car down the narrow, cracked streets of my old neighborhood, my hands gripping the wheel harder than necessary. I barely saw the Christmas decorations sagging from streetlights or the puddles reflecting half-lit houses. My mind was a blur of emotions: rage, sorrow, disgust. I had always known my parents could be selfish. I had known they were willing to lean on me until I collapsed. But it was a different thing entirely to realize they would steal from me, without hesitation, without shame, and still expect my loyalty. As I pulled into Marissa's parking lot, a dull exhaustion sank into my bones. She was waiting for me by the door, her arms folded tight against the December wind. I tossed her the spare set of car keys. "Problem solved?" she asked carefully. "For now," I muttered. But even as I said it, I knew better. People like my parents didn't see consequences the way normal people did. They only saw obstacles to bulldoze through. 2 days later, my phone buzzed again with a new message, this time from an unknown number. "You'll regret turning your back on your family. Blood is forever." It didn't even rattle me anymore. I screenshotted it, attached it to the ongoing police report, and blocked the number without hesitation. Let them scream into the void. But it didn't end there. On a dreary Saturday morning, Marissa and I were sipping coffee at the kitchen table when my phone lit up with another message. This time from Tyler. "Dad's out on bail. Uncle Mark paid. Be careful." I stared at the screen so long Marissa leaned over, reading it too. Her face drained of color. "Joanna, if he's out he might come back here." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "I know." I stood up, pacing the living room. The walls, which had once felt like a safe bubble, now seemed paper-thin. Every creak of the building, every footstep in the hallway outside made my heart jump. "We can't stay here," Marissa said firmly, setting down her coffee. "It's not safe. Not anymore." Hated it. Hated being forced to run. But deep down I knew she was right. That evening I packed up what little I had. Just a few clothes, my laptop, a few personal things I couldn't bear to lose again. Marissa helped, her hands steady even though I could see the worry in her eyes. Before I left, I hugged her tightly. "Thank you," I whispered. "For everything. You're stronger than you think," she said back. "Don't ever forget that." I moved in with Nora, a coworker who had heard enough rumors around the office to piece together the basics. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a key to her spare bedroom and said, "You're safe here." And for a while I was. But that sense of security was fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Because even though I had moved, even though I had fortified my bank accounts, locked down my phone, and scrubbed my digital presence as much as I could, my parents weren't giving up. Tyler warned me. "Mom's been asking around about where you work," he whispered over the phone one night. "And Dad's been talking about finding you, making you pay for humiliating him." I sat on Nora's worn couch, staring at the dark TV screen. "They don't want reconciliation," I said aloud, more to myself than to Tyler. "They want revenge." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Be careful, Joe. They're not thinking straight." Neither was I. Because anger, pure, searing anger, had taken root in my chest. I wasn't going to hide forever. I wasn't going to let them chase me out of my own life. If they wanted a war, they'd get one. Over the next few days, I carefully gathered everything I could. Police reports, screenshots of every threatening message, proof of the stolen car and laptop, the recordings from Marissa's security system showing Dad pounding on her door. I went to a lawyer. It cost more money than I was comfortable spending, but it was worth it. Because a week later, I filed for a restraining order against both of my parents. The paperwork was brutal. Every page felt like slicing my soul open for a stranger to examine. But it was necessary. Necessary to show a judge the truth I had lived with for too long. At the hearing, I stood before a worn wooden bench, hands clenched into fists at my sides, and told my story. I told them about the manipulation, the financial exploitation, the threats. I told them about Christmas Eve. I told them about the car, the laptop, the stalking. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I spoke with a quiet, steady rage that filled every corner of that courtroom. When it was over, the judge issued the order without hesitation. My parents were forbidden to contact me, approach my home, my work, or Tyler's school. Any violation would mean immediate arrest. When I stepped out of the courthouse into the cold afternoon air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Free. Truly, finally free. And as the winter sun dipped behind the courthouse, painting the sky in molten gold and dusky pink, I made a vow to myself. They had tried to destroy me. Instead, they had made me unstoppable. Freedom, however, didn't mean peace. Not right away. The restraining order was a legal shield, but it couldn't erase the years of damage or the lingering fear that one day I'd see my father's truck idling at the end of the street, or my mother's bitter face watching from a crowd. But slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild. Nora's apartment was small but cozy. She left me space to breathe, to heal. I spent the first few weeks catching up on sleep, eating actual meals, and remembering what it felt like not to live with constant dread. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the dramatic rebirth I had imagined. It was quiet. I got up for work every morning, made my own coffee, read cheap novels from the thrift store, went on long walks just to feel the cold air bite my cheeks. For the first time, I wasn't surviving for someone else. I wasn't treading water to keep a sinking ship afloat. I was simply living. And then came the message from Tyler that changed everything again. "Sis, I'm ready." Simple. Brave. Full of the kind of exhausted hope that only someone who had been trapped for too long could understand. He had turned 18 a few days earlier. He didn't throw a party, didn't post anything online. He just packed a bag and texted me. The next morning, I pulled up to the old house one last time. My car idled by the curb as I stared at the sagging porch, the peeling paint, the windows covered in blankets instead of curtains. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a tomb. Tyler came out carrying one backpack. That was it. No boxes. No suitcases. Just a backpack and the clothes on his back. I opened the trunk without a word. He tossed it in, slid into the passenger seat, and buckled up. For a few long seconds, we sat there in silence, the engine rumbling softly beneath us. "You sure about this?" asked finally. He nodded without hesitation. "There's nothing left for me here." I put the car in drive and didn't look back. We didn't speak much on the ride to his new dorm at the local community college. He stared out the window, watching the fields and crumbling strip malls blur past, a ghost of a smile flickering across his face. When we arrived, I helped him carry his few things inside. The dorm room was small and plain, beige walls, a metal-framed bed, a battered desk, but to Tyler it must have looked like a palace. Freedom. Opportunity. Fresh start. I stood in the doorway as he unpacked, feeling a fierce, burning pride in my chest. "You'll call me if you need anything, right?" said half-joking. He laughed, setting down a framed photo of us from years ago, a rare moment of real happiness caught on film. "You'll probably get sick of hearing from me." "Never," I said softly. After a quick dinner at a cheap noodle place down the street, I hugged him tightly in the parking lot. "Be proud of yourself," I whispered. "You survived something a lot of people wouldn't have." He squeezed back just as hard. "I learned from the best." As I drove away that night, a strange peace settled over me. We had made it out. Together. But not everyone was so lucky. Because back at the old house, the house that was supposed to be our home, everything was falling apart. Without Tyler and me, there was no one left to pay the bills, no one left to hold the place together with duct tape and desperation. Within 6 months, they were evicted for unpaid rent. I heard through a distant cousin that my parents ended up in a rundown apartment complex on the east side of the city. A place where broken windows stayed broken, where the smell of damp and rot clung to everything. Dad bounced from one dead-end job to another, constantly fired for drinking, fighting, or simply refusing to show up. Mom took a part-time job at a grocery store, bagging food for strangers who probably reminded her of the life she lost. They sent letters sometimes. Bitter, angry letters. Full of blame. Full of venom. Full of words like betrayal and ungrateful. I never answered them. I didn't need to. Their misery wasn't my revenge. My freedom was. Seasons shifted while my life quietly bloomed. Spring melted into summer, and by the time the trees were full and green again, Tyler was thriving at college. His texts were brighter now, filled with silly stories about dorm life, complaints about cafeteria food, and excitement about a professor who had convinced him to join the debate team. Every time my phone buzzed with one of his messages, a piece of the heaviness inside me loosened and drifted away. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. Meanwhile, my parents sank deeper into the life they had built for themselves. The life they had once thought they were too good for. The life they believed they could never fall into until they did. They had no one to blame but themselves, but that didn't stop them from trying. Every few months, through a distant relative or a shady Facebook account, I would hear little rumors. That Dad got arrested for a bar fight. That Mom had been caught shoplifting groceries she couldn't afford. That they were living without heat through the brutal Ohio winter. That the perfect family they had always bragged about had become a cautionary tale whispered about by neighbors. I should have felt sorry for them. A small part of me, the part that still remembered Christmas mornings curled up by the fireplace before everything turned toxic, ached for what could have been. But I didn't let that part rule me anymore. Because the truth was simple. You can only bleed for people so many times before you realize they're not even trying to stop the bleeding. They're just holding the knife tighter. 2 years after I left, almost to the day, I found myself sitting with Tyler by the river that wound through the city. It was one of our new traditions. A way to celebrate another year free. The sun was setting, painting the water in molten gold and deep crimson. A light breeze carried the scents of cut grass and late spring flowers. We sat on the old wooden benches, sharing a bag of cheap fast food, laughing about something stupid Tyler's roommate had done. Then, after a quiet moment, Tyler turned serious. "You know," he said, tossing a French fry into his mouth, "I used to think family was everything." I nodded, staring out at the slow-moving river. "So did I. But you taught me something better," he said, nudging me with his shoulder. "Family isn't blood. It's who shows up. It's who stays. It's who protects you even when it's hard." I blinked hard against the sudden sting in my eyes. "You protected me," he said. Even when it cost you everything. And you made it worth it, I whispered back. We sat there until the sun disappeared and the stars pricked holes in the darkening sky. Two survivors. Two kids who had dragged themselves out of the wreckage of a broken family and built something real, something unbreakable. Not a fairy tale. Not a perfect ending. But ours. The air cooled quickly as the stars grew brighter above the river, the city lights flickering in the distance. Tyler leaned back against the old wooden bench, hands laced behind his head, a soft smile playing on his lips. For the first time in a long time, he didn't look like a kid carrying the weight of the world. He looked free. And for the first time in years I realized I looked that way too. We didn't need grand gestures or fancy words to know what we had survived, and what we had built. We had clawed our way out of the wreckage, dragging hope behind us like a broken wing we refused to let die. We had won. And the people who tried to break us, they were just echoes now. Fading into the distance, into the past, into the irrelevance they had earned. I checked my phone one last time that night before heading home. No new threats. No desperate, manipulative messages. Only a few texts from friends, co-workers, and a notification about a new book I'd been wanting to read. My life was mine now. No strings. No chains. No debts unpaid. The apartment I shared with Nora eventually gave way to a place of my own. A tiny studio downtown with creaky floors, peeling paint, and a view of the city skyline if I craned my neck just right. But it was mine. Every crooked frame, every second-hand chair, every plant struggling for sunlight on the windowsill. It was a monument to my freedom. I built a career too. Worked my way up from a claims adjuster to a team leader. Paid off my old debts. Bought a better car. Took Tyler out to celebrate every small victory. A good grade, a new internship, a semester finished strong. Every little thing we achieved was a slap in the face to the people who had told us we weren't enough. Who had used us, drained us, and thrown us away. Every little thing we achieved was proof. We were never the problem. One rainy afternoon, almost 2.5 years after the night I walked out of that house forever, I received a final piece of news through a third-hand acquaintance. My parents had been evicted again. They were living in a shelter now. Dad was in and out of courtrooms, facing charges related to petty theft and unpaid debts. Mom had lost her job at the grocery store and was rumored to be living on food stamps, bouncing from place to place. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, staring out the rain-streaked window, feeling nothing. No triumph. No rage. No pity. Just closure. They had made their choices. And now they were living with the consequences. Meanwhile, Tyler was halfway through his engineering program, talking about internships and study abroad programs and futures so bright I could hardly stand to look at him without smiling. I had rebuilt everything they tried to take from me. Piece by piece. Step by bloody, stubborn, beautiful step. Because in the end, love isn't about bleeding yourself dry for people who refuse to lift you up. Love, real love, is standing up for yourself. Choosing your own peace. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. I leaned back in my chair, smiling faintly to myself as the rain whispered against the glass. They had lost everything. And I had found myself. And maybe that was the best revenge of all. In life, sometimes the hardest battles are the ones you fight in silence, away from the spotlight, away from the validation of others. Joanna and Tyler's story is a reminder that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away, and never look back. You don't owe your abusers a second chance. You owe yourself a first. What do you think about Joanna and Tyler's decision? Were they too harsh, or was it necessary for their own protection and peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more powerful stories that prove, sometimes survival is the sweetest revenge.